In this session, we are going to learn about anatomy of kidney. Kidney are a pair of bean-shaped organ. That means we have two kidneys and it is of bean shape. Each kidney is about 4 to 5 inches long and roughly the size of a large fist. It is the size of our large fist. Now we will talk about the location of kidney, where the kidneys are located. Kidneys are located retroperitoneally, that is behind the peritoneum in the abdomen, either side of the vertebral column, that means near to the vertebral column, and they typically extend from T12 to L13, that is thoracic 12 vertebra to lumbar 3rd vertebra. Although the right kidney is often situated slightly lower than the left kidney because there is a presence of liver. So in the image you can see this is the liver, this is the right kidney and this is the left kidney. As I told you, the kidney is extended from T12, that is thoracic 12 vertebra to lumbar 3rd vertebra, and the right kidney, this one is the right kidney, it is slightly lower than the left kidney. Why? Because of the presence of this liver. So this is about the location of the kidney. Moving on to the anatomy of kidney. Basically the anatomy of kidney is divided into the two parts. First is the external anatomy of the kidney and second is the internal anatomy of the kidney. External means there is an outside covering of the kidney, and internal means when we take a half section of the kidney and then we will open that section, and the structure which we visualize, this kind of structure, it is on the section. So that is called as the internal anatomy of the kidney. So firstly we will talk about the external anatomy of the kidney. Talking about the size of the kidney, a typical kidney is of 10 to 12 centimeter long, 5 to 7 centimeter wide and 3 centimeter thick. And talking about the weight of the kidney, it has a mass of 135 to 150 gram of weight. In external, there is a renal hilum. It is also called as the renal hilus. Renal hilus, through which the ureter emerges from the kidney along with the blood vessels, lymphatic vessels and the nerves. So you can see in the image, this is the area from where this ureter emerges from the kidney. Along with the ureter, there is artery, veins, nerves and the lymphatic vessels emerges, and this portion is called as a renal hilum. More in external anatomy of kidney has 3 layers. That means each kidney surrounded by the 3 layers. The first and the most inner one layer is the renal capsule. After the renal capsule, there is adipose capsule, and the third layer is the renal fascia. Now you can see in the image, this brown color, it is the renal capsule. This is the fat, it is the adipose capsule, and this layer, the outermost layer, it is the renal fascia. More in detail about the external anatomy of kidney. In renal capsule, it is a smooth, transparent sheet of dense irregular connective tissue. And what is the function of that capsule? It protects against the trauma and it helps to maintain the shape of the kidney. Talking about the adipose capsule. Adipose, the meaning of adipose is always related to fat. So you can get an idea that adipose capsule is a mass of a fatty tissue surrounding the renal capsule. Again, it also protects the kidney from the trauma and holds it firmly in the place within the abdominal cavity. So with the help of adipose capsule, the place of the kidney is fixed in the abdominal cavity. The third layer is the renal fascia. It is the outermost layer and it is the superficial thin layer of dense irregular connective tissue, and it anchors the kidney with the surrounding structures and the abdominal wall. So it fixes the place of the kidney. So there are the three layers: renal capsule, adipose capsule and the renal fascia. Moving on to the internal anatomy of kidney, if we will take a frontal section of the kidney, there are basically two parts: renal medulla and renal cortex. And renal medulla and renal cortex makes the renal parenchyma. So this is the kidney, and if we take this section, so internally the kidney look like this, and it has the three parts: renal medulla, renal cortex and parenchyma. In this you can see the section. If we take a section of a kidney, how it looks like. Talking more about the renal medulla, it is a deep, darker, reddish brown portion. It is which color? Deep and darker reddish brown portion, and it consists of several cone-shaped renal pyramids. The cone, we know the cone, the shape of the cone is wider from the top and the narrower from the bottom. The same way, we all know the shape of the pyramid. Pyramid shapes is like this, right? So the same way you can say this is the shape of pyramid and it is called as a renal pyramid. So you can see in the image, this is the renal medulla, right? And it has a pyramid, renal pyramid. It is a which shape? It is a cone shaped, and the base of each pyramid that faces the renal cortex. So you can say this is the base. This is the base of the renal pyramid and it faces the cortex, and this is the cortex. This portion is the cortex, right? So this faces the cortex and it is the wider and it is called as the base. And its apex, this is the apex, the narrower portion, right? This is the narrower end called as the renal papilla. It is called as renal papilla. So this is, you can see in the image, this is the renal papilla. This is base, this is wider one and this is the narrow one. It is called as the papilla, and this called as the renal medulla. Talking about the renal cortex, it is a superficial light red portion. The cortex, the meaning of the cortex itself is outer portion, the superficial portion. The smooth area extending from the renal capsule to the base of the renal pyramid. So you can see this is the renal capsule till the base of the pyramid. So this portion from here to here, this portion is called as the renal cortex. Renal cortex, which extends between the renal pyramid, is known as the renal columns. You can see in the image. From here, this is the capsule and this is the base of the renal pyramid, and it is called as cortex. Now, this cortex, when it extends between these two pyramids, then it is called as renal columns. It is called as renal columns. After medulla and cortex, there is a parenchyma. So renal cortex and renal medulla constitute parenchyma. Within the parenchyma, there are 1 million microscopic functional units of kidney, and which is called as nephrons. It is microscopic because they are very tiny in structure and there are millions in number. So there is a 1 million microscopic functional unit of the kidney, and it is called as a nephron. So you can see in the image, these are the tiny structures which are the nephrons, and it is in 1 million in numbers. Urine formed by the nephrons drains into the large papillary duct. This one is the papillary duct. So whatever the urine is formed in the nephrons, which drains into the large papillary duct. These are the ducts, which extends to the renal papilla of the pyramid. And this renal papilla, and it passes through it. One more thing about the nephrons are lying into the renal cortex as well as in the renal medulla. You can say this there is a color difference. This is the cortex and this is the medulla. Talking more about the parenchyma, papillary duct drain into the cup-like structure called the minor and the major calyx. Calyx, the meaning of calyx is like a cup. So you can see in the image, from the papillary duct, the urine drains into the minor calyx. These are the minor calyx. And then from the minor calyx, it drains into the major calyx. And each kidney has 8 to 10 minor calyx and 2 to 3 major calyx. Minor calyx receive the urine from the papillary duct, and from the minor calyx it goes into the major calyx, and from the major calyx urine drains into the single large cavity of the kidney, that is the renal pelvis. You can see this is the renal pelvis, and then from the renal pelvis urine goes into the ureter to the urinary bladder. So this is ureter, and from the ureter urine goes into the urinary bladder. So basically from the papillary duct to minor calyx to major calyx, from major calyx to renal pelvis, and from renal pelvis to ureter, and then it goes into the urinary bladder. In this image you can see more clear about this minor calyx. This is the minor calyx, this is the major calyx, and this is the renal pelvis. More about the parenchyma. The hilum expands into the cavity within the kidney called the renal sinus of the renal pelvis, and the calyx, renal blood vessels, and the nerves. So the hilum expands into the cavity. You can say this is the hilum, or it is also called as hilum, which expands into the cavity, and it is called as the renal sinus, which contains the part of renal pelvis and renal calyx, renal blood vessels, and the nerves. Moving on to the nephrons, as we discussed, the nephrons are the functional units of the kidney, and they are the 1 million in number, and it is very microscopic. So nephrons are the functional unit of the kidney, and each nephron consists of the two parts. First is the renal corpuscle and the second is the renal tubule. As you can see in the image, this portion is called as renal corpus, and this tube-like structure is called as renal tubule. First we will talk about the renal corpuscle. Renal corpuscle, which filters the blood plasma, and there are the two components of the renal corpuscle. First is the glomerulus and second is the glomerular capsule. It is also called as Bowman's capsule. Now the glomerulus, you can say this, glomerulus, it is a network of capillary. It is a network of capillary. Whereas glomerular capsule, or it is also called as Bowman's capsule, it is a double-walled epithelial cup. This is the double-walled epithelial cup that surrounds the glomerular capillary. We'll learn about the glomerulus. Glomerulus, it is a network. It is a tuft of capillaries that perform the first step of filtering blood. You can see in the image, this is the network of capillaries and it is called as glomerulus. Glomerulus receives its blood supply from the afferent arterioles. These are the afferent arterioles. The arterioles which enters into the glomerulus, which carries the blood to the glomerulus, it is called as afferent arterioles. Now the blood in the glomerulus, which is having the high pressure. So because of high pressure, the substance which are in the blood and which are very small enough, they passes through the pores of the capillary walls and are forced out. So you can see in the image, the blood enters from the afferent arterioles and there is a high pressure. High pressure in this capillaries, and there are substances which are very small enough, so it passes from this to this and it is forced out. The remaining blood exists through the efferent arterioles. Then after the blood get exit from the efferent arterioles. Now we will talk about the glomerular capsule. It is also called as Bowman's capsule. The glomerular capsule is a cup shaped. You can say this, it is a cup shaped body that encircle the glomerular capillaries. So you can say this, these are the capillaries and this capsule, it encircles the capillaries and it consists of two layers. One is the visceral layer and the second is the parietal layer. So talking about the visceral layer consists of modified simple squamous epithelial cells and those cells are called as podocytes. Now what is podocytes? Podo means foot and cytes means the cells. This modified simple squamous epithelial cells are called as podocytes and which is project branches that bear the fine food like projection called the pedicels. So this podocytes has fine foot projections and it is called as pedicels. Now what these pedicels do? Pedicels wrap around the single layer of endothelial cells of the glomerular capillaries and forms the inner wall of the capsule. Talking about the parietal layer of the glomerular capsule consists of simple squamous epithelium and forms the outer wall of the capsule. Now there is a space between the two layers. Which are two layers? Visceral layer and the parietal layer, and it is called as capsular space or it is also called as Bowman's space. So capsular space is the space between the two layers of the glomerular capsule. Talking about the renal tubules, the blood plasma is filtered in the glomerular capsule and then it is filtered fluid passes into the renal tubules. Renal tubules has three main sections. First is the proximal convoluted tubule. In short, it is called PCT. Second is the loop of Henle. It is also known as nephron loop. And the third is distal convoluted tubule. So renal tubule got the three sections. First is proximal convoluted tubule, second is loop of Henle, and the third is distal convoluted tubule. You can see in the image, this is the nephron, right? And this is the proximal convoluted tubule. Proximal, the meaning of proximal is the near one. So this is called as the proximal. This portion is called as a loop of Henle, and distal means the far. So that is distal convoluted tubule. First we will talk about the proximal convoluted tubule. PCT or the proximal denotes the part of the tubule attached to the glomerular capsule. As I told you, proximal means near. So this is the capsule and the part which is attached, it is the PCT. The wall of the proximal convoluted tubule consists of the cuboidal cells. Cuboidal cells means it is a cube-like structure, this kind of cuboidal cells, containing numerous mitochondria and bearing brush border. Now we all have seen the brush. Brush, it is like a microvilli that face the lumen from the interiorly. The high energy field, because of presence of mitochondria, it is high energy and large surface area of these cells support their function of reabsorption and the secretion. PCT, which has the cuboidal cells, and cuboidal cells contains numerous mitochondria and it has a brush border. So this brush border, it is of dense microvilli, and as we know the microvilli gives a more surface area. Why? Because of this more surface area, they can perform the reabsorption and the secretion, as well as the mitochondria provides high energy. Talking about the loop of Henle, it is also called as the nephron loop. The middle of the tubule, it connects to the proximal and the distal convoluted tubule. So this one is the distal tubule and this one is the proximal tubule. And this is connected with the loop of Henle. The loop of Henle extends into the medulla, renal medulla, and makes a hairpin turn. You can say this. This is a hairpin turn, this way. Hairpin turn and returns to the renal cortex. This is the cortex and this is the medulla. Then from the distal tubule, loop of Henle extends to the proximal tubule and returns to the renal cortex. As the loop descends, called the descending loop of Henle. This is called as the descending loop of Henle, and the tubule suddenly narrows and forming the thin segment of the loop. You can say this, it is very thin. Okay, this one is the wider and suddenly it becomes very thin. So this is the descending. This one is the descending loop of Henle, and the loop subsequently widens and in the ascending loop called the ascending limb of loop of Henle, and this is called as the ascending limb of loop of Henle, which one is the thick segment of the loop. The cells of the nephron loop vary from simple squamous epithelium, which are present in the descending limb, and thin segment of the ascending limb, to the cuboidal and the low columnar epithelium. So in nephrons, there are different types of cells are present. First is the simple squamous epithelium, where it is present. It is in the descending limb and in the thin segment of the ascending limb. There is a cuboidal cells and low columnar epithelium, which are in the thick segment of the ascending limb. But over here, there is a lack of microvilli. So you can see in the image, this is the proximal convoluted tubules. Then this is the descending loop of limb of Henle, and this is the ascending limb of loop of Henle, and this is considered as a loop of Henle. We'll talk about the distal convoluted tubule. In short, it is called as DCT. The distal convoluted tubule coils within the renal cortex and empties into the collecting duct. So you can see this is the convoluted tubule, distal convoluted tubule. This is the line which bifurcates the cortex, and this is the medulla. So this distal convoluted tubules get coiled into the cortex and empties into the collecting duct. This one is the collecting duct, and there is a cells which are cuboidal with the microvilli. Renal tubules of neighboring nephrons empty urine into a single collecting duct. Here and in the final portion of the distal convoluted tubule, there are cells that respond to hormone aldosterone and antidiuretic hormone, and there are cells that secretes H plus in effort to maintain the proper pH. So over here you can say this renal tubules of neighboring which collects the urine in the common collecting duct. Here also there is a nephron and here also there is a one nephron which drains into a common collecting tubule. And again there is a final portion of the distal convoluted tubules. There are cells which responds to aldosterone as well as the antidiuretic hormone and cells that secretes the H plus to maintain the proper pH. Juxtaglomerular apparatus is an area of the nephron where the different arteriole and the initial portion of the distal convoluted tubules are in the close contact. You can see in the image, this is the efferent arteriole and the distal convoluted tubule. This portion are attached and this is called as a juxtaglomerular apparatus. Here there are specialized smooth muscle cells of the efferent arteriole and it is called as the granular juxtaglomerular cells and it acts as a mechanoreceptors that monitors blood pressure in the efferent arteriole. So juxtaglomerular apparatus, it is an area where the nephron and efferent arterioles initial portions meet together and it makes the juxtaglomerular apparatus. In this image you can see very clearly this is the distal convoluted tubule and this is the efferent arteriole. This portion is called as juxtaglomerular apparatus. In the adjacent distal convoluted tubule, specialized cells called the macula densa and it acts as a chemoreceptor. These cells are called as macula densa and this acts as chemoreceptors that monitor the concentration of sodium and Cl- in the urine inside the tubule. And together these cells help to regulate blood pressure and production of the urine in the nephron. So this macula densa acts as a chemoreceptors and it monitors the concentration of Na plus and Cl-, and with the help of this there is a maintenance of blood pressure and the production of the urine into the nephron. Now we will talk about more on the types of nephron. There are basically two types of the nephron, cortical nephron and the second is juxtamedullary nephrons. These cortical nephrons are about 80 to 85% of the nephrons. So out of the overall nephrons, 80 to 85 nephrons are the cortical nephrons and rest of the 15 to 25 nephrons, 25% of nephrons are the juxtamedullary nephrons. Renal corpuscle lies in the outer portion of the renal cortex. It is about the cortical nephrons. Whereas in the juxtamedullary nephrons, renal corpuscle lies into the deep in the renal cortex and which is close to the medulla. Cortical nephrons has a short loop of Henle, whereas the juxtamedullary nephron has a long loop of Henle. Talking about the blood supply of the cortical nephrons, it receives from the peritubular capillaries and blood supply from the peritubular capillaries and vasa recta which supplies to the juxtamedullary nephron. So the cortical nephrons and the juxtamedullary nephrons. Cortical nephrons are 80 to 85%, whereas juxtamedullary nephrons are 15 to 25%. Cortical nephrons lie in outer portion of the renal cortex, whereas juxtamedullary renal corpuscle lie into the deep in the renal cortex. It is close to the medulla. Cortical nephrons are short loop of Henle, whereas juxtamedullary nephrons long loop of Henle. The cortical nephrons receive the blood from the peritubular capillaries, whereas juxtamedullary nephrons receives the blood from the peritubular capillaries and the vasa recta. So you can see in the image, these are the cortical nephrons and these are the juxtamedullary nephrons. That most of the portion of the cortical nephrons lies into the renal cortex, and most of the portion that is near to the medulla of the renal. We'll talk about the blood supply of the kidney. Kidney are abundantly supplied with the blood vessels, and it receives 20 to 25% of resting cardiac output. Means when we are in the resting phase, out of that 100% cardiac output, 20 to 25% cardiac output goes to the renal and via the right and left renal arteries. In adult, the blood flow through both the kidney is about 1200 ml per minute. So that means renal or the kidney receives 1200 ml of blood volume in a minute. In blood supply, we will see from where the kidney receives blood and in which vein it drains the blood. So from aorta, blood comes into the renal artery. Renal artery get branched into the segmental artery. From the segmental artery, it goes into the interlobar artery. Then from the interlobar artery, arcuate artery, cortical radiate artery, afferent arterioles, glomerular capillaries, efferent arterioles, vasa recta. It goes to the cortical radial vein, radiate vein, arcuate vein, interlobar vein, renal vein, and it goes into the inferior vena cava. So now we will see into the image from aorta. Kidney receives the blood into the renal artery. This is the renal artery. From the renal artery gets branched and it converts into the segmental artery. So you can see this. These are the segmental arteries. From the segmental arteries, it goes into the interlobar artery. These are the interlobar artery. From the interlobar artery, it goes into the arcuate artery. This arcuate artery, then from it goes into the cortical radiate artery. These are the cortical radiate artery. From the cortical radiate artery, as we have seen in the glomerulus, there is a arterioles, the afferent arteriole. So it converts into the afferent arterioles. Then it goes into the glomerular capillaries, and from the glomerular capillaries, it exists and comes into the afferent arteriole. From the efferent arteriole, blood drains into the vasa recta, and from the vasa recta, it goes into the cortical radiate vein. This is the cortical radiate vein. From the cortical radiate vein, it comes into the arcuate vein. This is the arcuate vein. From the arcuate vein, it comes into the interlobar vein. These are the interlobar vein, and from the interlobar vein, blood drains into the renal vein, and from the renal vein, blood goes into the inferior vena cava. So we will see this, all the branches supply blood to the which part of the kidney. So as we have already discussed, from the renal arteries, this renal arteries bifurcate into the right renal artery and the left renal artery. It branch into the segmental arteries. Segmental arteries, it supplies to the different areas of the kidney, and from the segmental artery, interlobal arteries which enter into the parenchyma and pass through the renal columns. That is, we know the renal columns are the space between the renal pyramid. And from the interlobal arteries, it becomes the arcuate artery. This arcuate artery runs through the between cortex and the medulla. From the arcuate artery, it becomes an interlobar arteries, which passes between the renal lobules, and from the interlobal arteries, it becomes the afferent arterioles, and this supplies to the renal cortex. From the afferent arterioles, it becomes the glomerular capillaries. From the glomerular capillaries, efferent arterioles, and then it comes into the peritubular capillaries. This peritubular capillaries surrounds the tubular part of the nephron, and from the peritubular capillaries, it transmits to the interlobular veins, arcuate veins, interlobal veins, renal veins, and lastly it drains into the inferior vena cava. So this is about the blood supply of the kidney. Now we will talk about the nerve supply of the kidney. Kidneys are supplied with the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nerves of the autonomic nervous system. It supplies by both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, which are the part of the autonomic nervous system. So this is about the nerve supply of the kidney. In a nutshell of anatomy of kidney, we saw that kidney is a bean-shaped paired organ which is located retroperitoneally between thoracic 12 to lumbar 3 vertebra. Right kidney is slightly lower than the left kidney because of the presence of the liver. Kidney's anatomy is basically divided into two: internal anatomy and the external anatomy. In the external anatomy of the kidney, it has the three layers. The innermost layer is the renal capsule, second layer is the adipose capsule, and the third layer is the renal fascia. In the internal anatomy of the kidney, it is about when we take a section of a kidney, the structure which we visualize, that is called as the internal anatomy. Internal anatomy of the kidney is divided into the three. First is the renal cortex, second is the renal medulla, and both the things make the parenchyma. Now the renal cortex, the portion from the renal capsule till the base of the renal pyramid, it is called as the renal cortex. If renal cortex extends between these two pyramids, it is called as the renal column. Then renal medulla consists of the renal pyramid. Renal pyramids are the cone-shaped tissues which is triangle in shape, pyramid in shape, and it has a base and it has a tip end. This is the internal and external anatomy of the kidney. Now the renal medulla has the nephron. Nephron is the basic functional unit of the kidney, and which is in 1 million in number, and the most important function of the nephron is to formulate the urine. This nephrons got the two basic structure. First is the renal corpuscle and the second is the renal tubules. Renal corpuscle has the two parts. Renal corpuscle has the two basic parts. Nephron is the basic functional unit of the kidney, which are 1 million in number, and it has the two basic structure. First is the renal corpuscle and the second is the renal tubule. Now the renal corpuscle has the two main structure, that is glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule. Glomerulus, it's efferent and afferent arterioles, and this Bowman's capsule is the two layers of visceral and the parietal layers. This nephron got the tubules also. There are the three tubules. First is the distal convoluted tubule, second is loop of Henle, and the third is proximal convoluted tubule. Now the proximal convoluted tubule, which is near to the renal corpuscle, so that's why it is called as a proximal convoluted tubule. Now this proximal convoluted tubule gradually descends and it becomes very thin and it extends, and it is called as a loop of Henle or the nephron loop. And this nephron loop, then it becomes wider and it converts into the distal convoluted tubule. So this is about the anatomy of the kidney.